I watched my sister Emma slide into her seat 3 rows ahead of me, her perfectly glossed lips curled into that familiar smirk of triumph. She didn't even glance back at me, too confident in her victory to bother with acknowledgement. Why would she? In her mind, I was still the same pathetic little pushover who'd spent 17 years letting her steal everything from me: my clothes, my achievements, my future. Mrs. Richardson stood at the front of the classroom, holding a stack of our final essays, the ones that would determine our valedictorian status, the ones that would make or break our college applications. Emma had spent all week bragging to her friends about how brilliant her essay was, how she'd poured her heart into every word, how Columbia would be begging her to attend. I felt the familiar burn of bitter satisfaction in my chest, an emotion I'd never experienced in my first life. "Before I return these," Mrs. Richardson said, her sharp eyes scanning the room, "I want to talk about academic integrity." Emma's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Almost. But I caught it because I was watching for it. Because I'd planned for exactly this moment for 6 months, ever since I'd woken up on my 16th birthday with memories of a life I'd already lived. A life that had ended with me broken, alone, and dead at 23, while Emma thrived on everything she'd stolen from me. "I've been teaching for 30 years," Mrs. Richardson continued, her voice carrying that particular tone that made even the most arrogant students sit up straight. "In that time, I've learned to recognize each of my students' unique voices, the way they construct arguments, their vocabulary choices, the rhythm of their sentences." She paused, letting her words sink in. "It's as distinctive as a fingerprint." My heart pounded with anticipation. This was it, the first real move in my carefully orchestrated revenge. Emma had been so predictable, so perfectly, wonderfully predictable. Just like last time, she'd waited until I was in the bathroom during lunch yesterday, broken into my locker using the combination she'd watched me enter 100 times, and photographed my essay with her phone. But unlike last time, I'd wanted her to steal it. Unlike last time, I'd left that essay there deliberately. A beautiful, eloquent trap written in a style completely different from anything I'd ever shown Mrs. Richardson. "Emma Foster," Mrs. Richardson called out, her tone neutral but her eyes cold. "Please stay after class. We need to discuss your essay." The color drained from Emma's face. She turned just enough for me to see her profile, the confusion and dawning horror in her expression. Around us, other students whispered, some already sensing blood in the water. Mrs. Richardson began returning papers, calling out names in alphabetical order. When she reached mine, Maya Foster, I walked to the front of the classroom on steady legs, nothing like the trembling, anxious girl I'd been in my previous life. She handed me my essay, the real one I'd submitted digitally the night Emma stole my fake one, with a small, knowing smile. At the top, written in red ink, a plus. "Beautiful work, Maya. This is the voice I've come to know and respect from you this year. See me after class as well." I returned to my seat, watching Emma's back rigid with tension. She knew something was wrong, she just didn't know how wrong yet. She couldn't comprehend that the sister she'd spent years crushing under her designer heel had somehow learned to bite back. But she would learn. This was just the beginning. The memories of my first life hit me with devastating clarity the morning I turned 16 again. One moment I was dying alone in a roach-infested studio apartment, my body shutting down from the overdose that was meant to stop the pain, and the next I was gasping awake in my childhood bedroom, the tiny converted storage room in the attic that my parents had given me while Emma enjoyed the spacious master bedroom suite. The disorientation lasted only seconds before the crushing weight of recognition set in. I was back in the house where I'd spent years being invisible, back in the life I'd escaped through death, only to find myself trapped here again with the memories of everything that had gone wrong. I'd spent that first day in a daze, testing the reality of my situation, checking dates on my phone, looking at my face in the mirror, 16 again, with the acne and the hollow cheeks from years of being served smaller portions at dinner, reading old text messages that proved this wasn't just a vivid dream. By nightfall, I'd accepted the impossible truth. I had somehow been given a second chance, and this time, I wouldn't waste it being their victim. Understanding how I'd ended up here required looking back at the 17 years of systematic abuse that had shaped my first life into a tragedy. It started when I was born, or rather, when Emma was born 2 years before me. My mother, Catherine Foster, had suffered through a difficult pregnancy with Emma, and the doctors told her another child might kill her. But my father, James Foster, insisted on trying for a son. When I arrived, another daughter, I became the walking reminder of his disappointment and my mother's resentment. Emma, meanwhile, was everything they'd wanted: beautiful from birth, charismatic, naturally talented at everything she tried. She learned early that our parents' love was infinite for her and non existent for me. And she learned something else: that she could take anything of mine without consequence. It started small. My toys became our toys, which meant Emma played with them and I watched. My birthday presents were shared with her because sisters should share, even though her presents remained exclusively hers. When I complained, I was called selfish. When Emma took, she was called generous for including me. As we grew older, the theft escalated. In middle school, I'd stay up late writing short stories, pouring my heart into worlds where I mattered, where I was loved. Emma would find them and submit them to school contests under her name. When she won, our parents threw her a party. When I tried to tell them the truth, they said I was jealous of my sister's talent and punished me for lying. In my first life, I'd learned to stop trying. I became smaller, quieter, less visible. I accepted that I was the family scapegoat, the one who existed to make Emma shine brighter by comparison. I'd poured what little self-worth I had left into my academics, earning perfect grades through sheer determination, only to watch Emma copy my homework and claim credit for group projects I'd completed alone. The pattern repeated through high school. Emma would steal my clothes and lose them, raid my small savings to buy things for herself, even kiss boys I liked just to prove she could take them from me. Our parents not only allowed it, they encouraged it. When I got a part-time job at 15 to save for college, my mother made me give half my paycheck to the family fund, which mysteriously only ever funded Emma's wants. The final betrayal came during our senior year. I'd spent months on my college essays, writing and rewriting until they perfectly captured my voice and experiences. Emma stole them, changed a few details, and submitted them as her own to the same schools I'd applied to. With our parents' strong alumni connections and generous donations, she got into Columbia with my words. I got rejection after rejection because admissions officers thought I'd plagiarized her. I'd ended up at community college on a partial scholarship, working 3 jobs to pay for it while living at home and watching Emma thrive at my dream school on our parents' dime. When I finally scraped together enough to move out at 20, I was already broken. The next 3 years were a blur of depression, failed relationships with people who sensed my damage, and eventually the pills that seemed like the only way to make the pain stop. But somehow, impossibly, I'd gotten a second chance. And I'd spent the past 6 months since my 16th birthday carefully analyzing every mistake I'd made, every time I'd been too trusting, too weak, too naive. I'd studied Emma's patterns, our parents' behaviors, the exact timeline of events that had led to my destruction. More importantly, I'd started building a different version of myself. A Maya who documented everything, who made backup copies, who played the long game and set traps instead of just reacting to abuse. I changed my locker combination when Emma wasn't looking, started using cloud storage with 2-factor authentication for my important work, cultivated relationships with teachers by showing them my real writing style consistently throughout the year, and I'd waited for Emma to be Emma because some things never change, and her inability to resist stealing from me was as reliable as sunrise. The essay theft was perfect because it had happened in my first life too. Mrs. Richardson had failed both of us, Emma for plagiarism and me for supposedly letting her plagiarize. We'd both lost the valedictorian spot to Jeremy Chen. Emma had thrown a massive tantrum that made our parents punish me for not protecting her, and my college applications had been tainted by the incident. This time would be different. This time, I'd given Emma a beautiful, articulate essay about overcoming adversity and finding your voice, all themes that resonated with college admissions officers. But I'd written it in a style completely different from the writing I'd been showing Mrs. Richardson all year. Literary, where I was usually direct. Flowery, where I was usually precise. Full of classical allusions, where I usually wrote from contemporary perspectives. Then I'd submitted my real essay digitally, the one written in my authentic voice, the one Mrs. Richardson would instantly recognize as mine, the one about being invisible in your own family and finding strength in solitude, raw, honest, undeniably mine. Emma had taken the bait perfectly. She'd stolen the fake essay, submitted it as her own, and now she was about to learn that theft has consequences. The bell rang, and students flooded out of the classroom. Emma remained frozen in her seat, her knuckles white as she gripped her desk. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, waiting for Mrs. Richardson to call us both up. "Maya, Emma, please come here," Mrs. Richardson said, her voice cutting through the noise of departing students. I walked to the front calmly while Emma approached on shaking legs. Jeremy Chen gave me a curious look as he left. He'd be valedictorian in this timeline too if this went well, but I didn't mind. I didn't need the title. I just needed Emma's fall to be public and permanent. Mrs. Richardson waited until the last student left before closing the door. Then she turned to us with an expression I'd never seen in my first life. Stern disappointment mixed with something that looked almost like sadness. "I've taught you both for 3 years," she began, looking directly at Emma. "Maya has consistently shown a particular writing style. Concise, thoughtful, with a tendency toward contemporary references and a direct, almost journalistic approach to argumentation." She tapped my essay. "This is Maya's voice. I would recognize it anywhere." She picked up another paper from her desk, Emma's, my stolen words in her handwriting. "This," Mrs. Richardson continued, "is not Maya's style. This is eloquent and sophisticated, yes, but it's completely different. Different vocabulary, different sentence structure, different references." She paused. "Emma, this is also not your style. You typically write with flair but less substance. You favor style over content. This essay has both, which made me suspicious immediately." Emma's face had gone from white to red. I can explain." "Please don't insult my intelligence by lying," Mrs. Richardson interrupted. "I've already reviewed the security footage from the hallway cameras. I watched you break into Maya's locker yesterday during lunch." My heart soared. Security cameras. I hadn't even thought of those. This was better than I'd planned. "Mrs. Richardson, it's not what it looks like," Emma started. "Then what is it?" The teacher's voice was ice. "Because what it looks like is that you stole your sister's work, submitted it as your own, and thought you could get away with it because you've always gotten away with it before." The accuracy of that statement hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Emma's eyes darted to me, finally seeing me as a threat instead of a victim. "Maya let me copy before. This is normal for us. She helps me." "Stop!" Mrs. Richardson held up her hand. "I'm going to Principal Morrison about this. Academic dishonesty of this magnitude is an expellable offense. At minimum, you'll fail this class, which means you won't graduate on time." "No!" Emma's composure cracked completely. "You can't. I'm supposed to go to Columbia. I need this grade." "You should have thought of that before you decided to cheat." Mrs. Richardson turned to me. "Maya, I apologize that you've been put in this position. Your real essay is extraordinary, painfully honest. The one you left in your locker was good too. Suspiciously good, given how different it was from your usual work. That's what tipped me off initially. I knew something was wrong. I'd counted on exactly this. On her knowing me well enough to spot the inconsistency. Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. I just want to be judged on my own work. And you will be. Your essay is easily the best in the class. I'll be recommending you for the English Department Award." She glanced at Emma with disgust. "You're dismissed, Maya. Emma, you need to stay." I gathered my things and walked to the door, feeling Emma's desperate eyes on my back. Just before I left, I heard her hiss, "How could you do this to me?" I turned back, making sure Mrs. Richardson heard my response. "I didn't do anything to you, Emma. You did this to yourself." The door closed on her protests, and I walked down the empty hallway with my head high for the first time in 2 lives. But I knew this was just the opening move. Emma's fall had started, but my parents would rally to her defense. They always did. Which meant I needed to be prepared for the backlash and have my next traps ready. Because unlike my first life, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had knowledge. I had documentation. And I had rage that had been fermenting for 17 years plus 3 years of a life that had ended in overdose and misery. This time, I would win everything. The call came during my last period. I was summoned to Principal Morrison's office, where I found my parents already waiting, their faces tight with anger. Emma sat in the corner, eyes red from crying, her usual manipulation tactic. Maya, my father's voice was hard, what's this about you setting Emma up? So that was the story they decided on. I kept my face carefully neutral, channeling the confidence I'd built over 6 months of planning. I didn't set her up. She broke into my locker and stole my essay. That's not what Emma says. My mother jumped in immediately, her voice dripping with accusation. She says you've been helping her all year and now you're trying to sabotage her college applications because you're jealous. Principal Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, cleared her throat. Actually, we have security footage showing Emma breaking into Maya's locker. There's no ambiguity here. My father's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to having his daughter's narrative challenged by evidence. Surely this is just a misunderstanding. Sisters share things. Maya probably gave Emma permission. The locker was locked. Emma forced it open. Principal Morrison's tone left no room for argument. And Mrs. Richardson has documented the plagiarism. The essays are completely different from both girls' usual work patterns. Emma submitted something far above her typical level that matches nothing in her portfolio, while Maya submitted work consistent with everything she's shown all year. This is ridiculous, my mother stood up. You're going to ruin Emma's future over a simple mistake? Maya should have just told her not to use it. Catherine, Principal Morrison said firmly, your daughter committed academic fraud. The school has a zero-tolerance policy. Emma will fail the course and face a 3-day suspension. Her college applications will have to be updated to reflect this incident. Emma's sobs grew louder. Right on cue, I'd heard this exact performance dozens of times in my first life. You can't do this. My father slammed his hand on the desk. Do you know how much money we donate to this school? Our family has been here for generations. And that's precisely why this is so disappointing. Principal Morrison stood her ground. The Foster name used to mean integrity. I won't let it become synonymous with corruption and privilege. I watched my parents' faces cycle through shock, anger, and calculation. They'd never been told no before, not when it came to Emma. In my first life, they'd managed to get the whole incident buried through a combination of donations and threats. But I'd prepared for that. Principal Morrison, I said quietly. I recorded everything in Mrs. Richardson's classroom earlier, including Emma admitting she's copied from me before. I have it on my phone if you need additional evidence. The lie came smoothly. I didn't have a recording. I hadn't thought of it. But my parents didn't know that, and I watched their faces pale. If there was proof of a pattern of cheating, Emma's Columbia acceptance could be rescinded, even if they managed to bury this incident. You little bitch, Emma hissed, dropping the crying act for just a moment before catching herself. Emma, my mother gasped, but it was too late. Principal Morrison had seen the mask slip. I think we're done here, Principal Morrison said coldly. Emma's punishment stands. Maya, you're free to go back to class. Mr. and Mrs. Foster, I suggest you teach your daughter about accountability before it's too late. My parents left fuming, dragging Emma with them. As I walked past them in the hallway, my mother grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. You think you're so clever, she whispered, venom in her voice. But you just declared war on this family, and you're going to lose. I pulled my arm free and met her eyes. Try me. The shocked look on her face was worth everything. She'd never heard me stand up to her before, never imagined I would. But I had nothing left to lose. In my first life, I'd already lost everything, including my life. This time, I would take back everything that was stolen from me, and I would make them all pay for every year of suffering they'd inflicted. That night, I didn't go home. I'd been preparing for this moment, knowing my parents would retaliate. Instead, I went to the one place I'd discovered in my months of planning, the one secret that would change everything. 3 months ago, I'd been doing genealogy research for a school project when I'd stumbled across something shocking. My mother's father, who she claimed was dead, was actually alive. Robert Chen, a tech billionaire who lived 2 states away. My mother had been disowned 20 years ago for refusing to sign a prenup before marrying my father. Her father had seen through James Foster's gold-digging intentions immediately. In my first life, I'd never known this grandfather existed. My mother had erased him from family history completely, but this time, I'd found his contact information and I'd taken a risk. I'd written him a letter explaining who I was and including a DNA test result I'd ordered in secret. He'd responded within a week. And over the past 3 months, we'd been building a relationship through phone calls and video chats. He'd watched me, assessed me, and apparently decided I was worth investing in. He'd seen in me something my parents never had: intelligence, determination, potential. I took the bus to his hotel. He was in town this week for business, and when I'd called him earlier to explain what had happened, he'd immediately offered sanctuary. Robert Chen was 73 but looked younger, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I arrived at his suite, he pulled me into a hug, the first genuine affection I'd received from family in either lifetime. "Tell me everything," he said, pouring us both tea. And I did. I told him about Emma's theft, about my parents' reaction, about the years of abuse. I didn't tell him about the rebirth. Some secrets were too impossible to share. But I told him enough. When I finished, his face was hard. "Your mother learned nothing from being cut off. She's raising Emma to be just as entitled as she was." He paused. "But you're different. You have fight in you." "I want to win," I said simply. "Not just survive, win." He smiled, and it was sharp. "Good, because I'm going to help you. But you need to understand something, Maya. Revenge isn't just about punishing them. It's about building yourself up so high that their opinions no longer matter. Can you do that?" I thought about the skills I'd developed in my first life, the hard lessons learned. I thought about the knowledge I carried now, the second chance I'd been given. "Yes." "Then here's what we're going to do." He pulled out his phone. "First, you're going to come live with me. Your parents have shown they're unfit guardians. I'll petition for emergency custody based on the evidence of their favoritism and your mother's physical assault today. Did you document those marks on your arm?" I pulled up my phone, showing him the photos I'd taken in the school bathroom immediately after. Learning to document everything was the first lesson of my second life. "Perfect. Second, I'm going to hire you a tutor and get you prepared for the SAT again. You'll take it as many times as needed to get a perfect score. Third, we're going to document every instance of abuse, every penny they've stolen from you, every time Emma has plagiarized your work. And we're going to build a case that will bury them." "What about Emma's college?" I asked. "What about it?" His eyes glinted. "If she got in on stolen work and your parents' money, she doesn't deserve to be there. We'll make sure Columbia knows exactly who they admitted." A warm feeling spread through my chest. For the first time in 2 lives, someone was on my side. Someone believed me. Someone with the power to actually change things was willing to fight for me. "Why are you helping me?" I asked softly. He set down his tea and looked at me with infinite sadness. "Because when your mother was your age, she was like Emma, entitled, cruel to those she saw as beneath her. I tried to teach her better, but her mother, my late wife, indulged her too much. When she chose that charlatan James Foster over her own family, I cut her off hoping she'd learn humility." He shook his head. "But all I did was ensure that my granddaughter grew up in poverty and abuse while the wrong granddaughter got everything. I failed you, Maya. Let me make it right." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. I'd cried enough in my first life. This life was for winning. "Thank you, grandfather." "Call me Yeye," he said, using the Mandarin term. "It's what your mother used to call me before she forgot where she came from. You'll learn Mandarin too, and business, and everything else you need to take back what should have been yours." That night, I slept in a guest room bigger than my entire attic space at home, in sheets that cost more than my mother's monthly grocery budget. And for the first time since waking up in my second life, I felt something other than rage and determination. I felt hope. The custody battle was swift and brutal. My grandfather hired the best family lawyers in the state, and they tore apart my parents' facade of normalcy with surgical precision. Every instance of favoritism I documented, every meal where Emma got more than me, every gift given to her but not to me, every dollar of my job earnings they'd taken, the photos of my arms bruised from my mother's grip, testimony from teachers who'd noticed the disparities between how my parents treated Emma and me at school events. My parents fought back with everything they had, but James Foster's family money had long since run out, and my mother's had been cut off 20 years ago. They couldn't afford lawyers good enough to counter my grandfather's team. More importantly, they couldn't hide from the truth when it was laid out in organized evidence and witness testimony. Emma had to testify too. Watching her squirm on the stand, trying to justify why she'd stolen my work only a few times and why it was no big deal, was cathartic in ways I couldn't fully express. The judge granted my grandfather emergency custody after only 2 weeks, citing evidence of long-term emotional abuse and financial exploitation. My parents were ordered to pay back every cent they'd taken from my job earnings with interest. They were also banned from contacting me except through supervised channels. I moved into my grandfather's estate and met his staff, who treated me with a respect I'd never experienced. He immediately enrolled me in online courses to catch me up on everything I'd missed from having subpar instruction, hired tutors for SAT prep, and introduced me to his business associates. But more than that, he listened. He asked about my dreams, my goals, what I wanted to study. When I told him I'd always loved writing, he didn't dismiss it as impractical. Instead, he connected me with his friend who ran a literary magazine who agreed to mentor me. The contrast with my parents was staggering. Where they had crushed my ambitions to make Emma shine brighter, Yaya cultivated them. Where they had stolen from me, he invested in me. Where they had made me small, he encouraged me to be expansive, but I didn't forget about Emma or my parents. I couldn't. Not when I knew what they'd done to me across 2 lifetimes. And my grandfather, who had his own old wounds where my mother was concerned, didn't ask me to forgive or forget. Justice, he told me one evening over dinner, is not the same as mercy. They deserve to face consequences for what they did to you. So, while I studied and grew stronger, we continued building our case. Not just for custody, that was settled, but for something bigger. Emma's college applications. My grandfather's investigator uncovered something beautiful. Emma hadn't just plagiarized my work this once. She'd been doing it for years. Every award-winning essay she'd submitted for competitions, every scholarship application, every college essay. The investigator traced my writing through cached versions of documents on the family computer, matching timestamps and metadata. Emma had stolen my words dozens of times, and I'd been too beaten down in my first life to fight back. But now I had proof. Undeniable, court-documented proof. We compiled it all into a detailed report with side-by-side comparisons of my original work and Emma's submissions. Then my grandfather did something I hadn't expected. "I'm not going to send this to Columbia," he said, watching my reaction. My heart sank. "But I'm going to let you decide how to handle it. She's your sister despite everything. You've earned the right to choose whether to pull this trigger." I thought about it for days. In my first life, Emma had stolen everything and thrived. She'd graduated from Columbia with honors, using the network our parents paid for, and the skills she'd developed by standing on my back. She'd gotten a job at a prestigious firm, married well, and lived the life I'd dreamed of while I'd overdosed in poverty. She'd never once acknowledged what she'd done to me, never apologized, never even seemed to realize I was a person worthy of consideration. The Maya of my first life might have hesitated, might have wanted to be the bigger person, might have held on to hope that Emma could change. But I died because of their abuse. I'd ended my own life because the pain of being invisible, stolen from, and crushed had become too much to bear. And I'd been given a second chance not to be merciful to people who'd shown me none, but to finally claim the life I deserved. "Send it," I told my grandfather. "Send it to Columbia and every other school she applied to. Let them know exactly who they're dealing with." He nodded approvingly. "I'll have my lawyers do it. It will be airtight." The emails went out on a Friday evening. By Monday morning, Emma's acceptance to Columbia had been rescinded. The other schools followed shortly after. The local news picked up the story. Local students' college dreams shattered after systematic plagiarism revealed. The angle focused on academic integrity and the dangers of cheating, but Everyone at school knew it was Emma Foster. She became infamous overnight, the girl who'd stolen her sister's work for years. The beautiful, popular Emma Foster revealed as a fraud. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates I'd barely spoken to, suddenly wanting to be my friend now that I was the granddaughter of a billionaire who'd stood up to her abuser. I deleted most of them. Real friends don't wait until you have power to notice you exist. But there was one message I treasured. Mrs. Richardson writing to tell me she was proud of me and that my essay had won not just the English Department Award, but a national writing competition she'd submitted it to without telling me. The prize included a college scholarship and publication in a prestigious journal. My words, my work, finally recognized under my own name. Emma didn't return to school. My parents pulled her out, claiming the environment was toxic. Really, she couldn't face the whispers and the stares. She couldn't handle being the cautionary tale instead of the golden child. My mother tried to call me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that oscillated between rage and manipulation. How could you destroy your sister's life? She's devastated. You've killed her future over petty jealousy. A real sister would have protected her. You're a monster. I didn't listen to most of them, but I saved them all as evidence of her continued emotional abuse. My father tried a different approach, showing up at my grandfather's estate with lawyers, claiming my grandfather had poisoned me against my family. Security escorted him off the property. The lawyers filed harassment charges. And through it all, I studied, I wrote, I healed. Therapy helped. Real therapy with a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal family dynamics, but systematic scapegoating designed to elevate Emma at my expense. She validated feelings I'd been told were unreasonable for 17 years. My SAT scores came back perfect. My grades were immaculate. And when I started applying to colleges, I did it with confidence, knowing that every word in my applications was genuinely mine, that every achievement was earned, that no one could take this from me. I applied to Columbia, partly because I could, and partly because I wanted them to see what they'd almost missed. The admissions officer I met during my interview recognized my name. "You're the girl who exposed her sister's plagiarism," he said carefully. "I'm the girl whose work was plagiarized for years," I corrected, "and who finally had the courage to stand up for herself." He smiled. "Your essay about finding your voice after years of being silenced was extraordinary. One of the best we've received this year." "Thank you. I earned every word of it." I got my acceptance letter in March, early admission with a full academic scholarship. I sent a screenshot to my mother with a simple message. "This is what I earned. Not Emma, me." She didn't respond. Graduation day arrived with the weight of symbolic victory. I was valedictorian, the natural result of 4 years of perfect grades and academic recognition. Jeremy Chen was salutatorian, having graciously stepped aside when he saw my GPA edged his by a fraction. Unlike Emma, he'd earned his position through genuine effort and congratulated me warmly. My grandfather sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Next to him were my therapist, who'd become a mentor, and Mrs. Richardson, who'd agreed to be my guest. Behind them sat lawyers from my grandfather's firm and several business associates who'd taken an interest in my future. My parents weren't there. They hadn't been invited. Emma wasn't graduating at all. She'd withdrawn from school completely after losing Columbia and having no backup plan. Last I'd heard, she was taking community college classes online, same as I'd been forced to do in my first life. The irony wasn't lost on me. As valedictorian, I had to give a speech. I'd written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to balance honesty with the dignity expected of the moment. In the end, I decided to tell my truth without naming names. "Success," I began, my voice carrying across the assembled graduates and families, "is often presented as the result of talent and hard work. And those things matter, but today I want to talk about something we discuss less: the courage to stand up when someone tries to steal your success from you." I saw some uncomfortable shifting in the audience. Good. Discomfort meant people were paying attention. For years, I watched someone close to me take credit for my work. I told myself it didn't matter, that being kind was more important than being recognized, that family meant sacrifice. But I was wrong. I paused, looking directly at my grandfather. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. And family shouldn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The audience was completely silent now. This year, I learned to document my truth, to stand up for myself, to accept help from people who actually cared about my well being. And because of that, I'm standing here today as valedictorian with a full scholarship to my dream school, speaking words that are entirely my own. I let that sink in. To everyone graduating today, your work matters. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if someone tries to take what you've earned, fight back. You deserve to be seen for who you really are, not who others want to use you to be. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. My grandfather stood, followed by Mrs. Richardson, then the entire front section. Soon the whole auditorium was on their feet. I saw a few parents who'd been friends with mine looking uncomfortable, probably realizing I was talking about Emma. I saw teachers nodding in recognition, perhaps remembering times they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't intervened. And I saw my classmates, some sympathetic, some ashamed they hadn't noticed my suffering, some clearly glad I'd won. After the ceremony, I was swarmed with congratulations. Local reporters wanted interviews about my inspiring comeback story. College recruiters wanted to talk about opportunities. Even a literary agent approached about potentially turning my experience into a memoir. But the moment that mattered most came when I was alone with my grandfather, standing by his car in the parking lot. "Your mother called me today," he said quietly. I stiffened. What did she want? To beg me to give Emma another chance, to use my connections to get her into a good school, to save the family. He shook his head. She still doesn't understand that Emma isn't the family member worth saving. What did you tell her? That she made her choice 20 years ago when she chose money over integrity, and Emma made her choice every time she stole from you. Consequences are the only teacher they have left. He put his hand on my shoulder. You, however, have a future brighter than anything they could have given you. Columbia waits. After that, whatever you want to build. I hugged him tightly, this grandfather I'd never known in my first life, who'd become my salvation in my second. Thank you, Yeye, for everything. Thank you for giving an old man a reason to hope, he said. Your mother broke my heart when she turned her back on her family. But you've healed it. You're the granddaughter I always wanted. As we drove away from the school for the last time, I watched it recede in the side mirror. In my first life, I'd left this place broken and defeated, headed for a slow downward spiral into poverty and death. In this life, I was leaving as valedictorian with a full scholarship, a grandfather who loved me, and a future I'd earned through my own effort and intelligence. The revenge was sweet, but sweeter still was the knowledge that I'd won not by becoming like Emma, not by stealing or manipulating or tearing others down, but by being authentically myself and refusing to stay silent anymore. My first year at Columbia passed in a blur of academic excellence and personal growth. Away from my parents' toxicity, I flourished. I joined the literary magazine, published several short stories, and started building a name for myself in creative writing circles. My professors recognized my talent. Real talent, earned through practice and dedication, not stolen from others. I made friends. Real friends who liked me for who I was, not who my family was or what I could do for them. I dated occasionally, though I was cautious, still carrying scars from my first life's failed relationships. Therapy helped me understand that I could be vulnerable without being a victim, that I could trust without being naive. My grandfather visited often, taking me to expensive dinners where we'd discuss literature, business, and life. He'd started teaching me about his company, hinting that if I was interested, there might be a place for me there after graduation. Not because of nepotism, but because I'd proven I had the intelligence and work ethic to earn it. But I couldn't fully escape my past. My parents kept trying to reach me through various channels, email accounts I'd abandoned, social media I'd locked down, even showing up at events they knew I'd attend. Each time they tried a different approach. And first, it was anger. You destroyed this family. Your sister is ruined because of you. Then guilt. We gave you everything. We raised you. How can you be so ungrateful? Then manipulation. Emma is depressed. She talks about hurting herself. Don't you care? Finally, desperation. Your grandfather is turning you against us. We love you. Please come home. I blocked them every time. My therapist helped me see these messages for what they were: extinction bursts, last ditch attempts to regain control over someone who'd broken free. They didn't love me. They loved having a scapegoat, a person to exploit, a shadow to make Emma's light seem brighter. Emma herself tried to reach out once, sending a long email through a fake account about how sorry she was, how she'd made mistakes, how we could rebuild our relationship. I read it carefully, analyzing every word for sincerity. I found none. It was all surface-level apologies with no real acknowledgement of the systematic abuse. No understanding of how her actions had affected me. Just a request that I move on and help her get into college because we're family. I deleted it without responding. The story leaked eventually. It always does. Some enterprising journalism student at Columbia wrote an article about the plagiarism scandal that rocked a suburban high school, complete with interviews from my former teachers and classmates. The article went viral on social media, spawning discussions about sibling abuse, academic integrity, and family scapegoating. Some people thought I was brave. Others called me vindictive. A few said I should have been the bigger person and protected my sister regardless. I stopped reading comments after a while. The people who called me vindictive had never been systematically destroyed by their own family. They'd never watched their achievements stolen, their identity erased, their suffering dismissed as jealousy. They'd never died alone at 23 because the weight of being nobody's priority became too heavy to bear. But I had, and I'd chosen to survive my second chance by refusing to be silent. My sophomore year brought new opportunities. The literary magazine I'd joined during freshman year elected me editor-in-chief. My short story collection won a university-wide writing competition. A small press reached out about publishing my work, and then came the call I'd been expecting but dreading. "Maya," my grandfather's lawyer said carefully, "your parents are suing for defamation. They claim your graduation speech and subsequent interviews have damaged their reputation and caused them financial harm." I wasn't surprised. Cornered animals always lash out, and I'd effectively cornered them by succeeding so visibly despite their efforts to destroy me. "What do we do?" I asked. "We win," the lawyer said simply. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. We have documentation of everything they did. We'll make them regret this." The lawsuit was their biggest mistake. It forced everything into the public record, all the evidence we'd compiled for the custody case, all the proof of Emma's plagiarism, all the financial records showing how they'd stolen from me. Discovery was brutal for them, revealing even more instances of favoritism and abuse that we hadn't originally documented. Their lawyer tried to paint them as loving parents who'd made some mistakes but didn't deserve to have their lives destroyed. Our lawyer presented them as systematic abusers who'd scapegoated one daughter to elevate the other, documenting patterns that went back to my early childhood. The testimony was hardest. Sitting across from my mother and father in a courtroom, watching them cry and claim they'd always loved me, that they'd done their best, that I was exaggerating everything out of spite. But I had Mrs. Richardson, who testified about years of noticing discrepancies in how I was treated. I had former employers who'd witnessed my parents taking my paychecks. I had neighbors who'd heard my mother screaming at me while praising Emma in the same breath. I had my therapist's professional opinion on the long-term psychological damage of growing up as a family scapegoat. Most devastatingly, I had Emma herself, who fell apart on the stand when asked directly how many times she'd plagiarized my work. She tried to minimize it, then got defensive, then finally broke down crying and admitted maybe a dozen times, but insisted it wasn't that big a deal because Maya always wrote better than me anyway. The admission was everything. Emma had just confirmed under oath that she'd built her entire academic career on stolen work. The judge dismissed my parents' lawsuit with prejudice and ordered them to pay our legal fees. More than that, he issued a restraining order barring them from contacting me for 5 years and recommended they seek family therapy. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us with questions. My grandfather handled most of them with practiced grace, but one reporter pushed through to me directly. "Maya, do you have any message for your family?" I thought about it for a long moment, remembering the girl I'd been in my first life. broken, invisible, convinced she deserved the abuse. Then I thought about the woman I was becoming in this life. Strong, recognized, refusing to be diminished. I hope they learn, I said finally. I hope they understand that you can't build one person up by tearing another down. And I hope that someday Emma finds her own voice instead of stealing mine. The reporter seemed disappointed that I hadn't been more dramatic. But I meant what I said. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd exposed their abuse. I'd won my freedom and built a life beyond their reach. Anything more would just be cruelty for cruelty's sake, and I refused to become like them. Besides, I had better things to do than dwell on people who'd proven they didn't deserve space in my life. I had stories to write, a degree to finish, a future to build. My parents had tried to erase me to make Emma shine, but I'd become incandescent on my own terms, and no amount of their bitterness could dim that light now. Senior year at Columbia was everything I'd dreamed of, and more. My thesis, a novel about family betrayal and finding strength in survival, was selected for the university's prestigious writing showcase. A literary agent read it and offered representation. Publishers were interested. More importantly, I was happy, genuinely, sustainably happy in a way I'd never been in my first life. I had friends who valued me, professors who respected my work, and a grandfather who'd become the parent I'd never had. The novel sold in a preemptive offer to a major publisher. They wanted to market it as literary fiction inspired by real events, though I'd fictionalized enough details to protect myself legally. The advance was substantial, enough to pay for graduate school if I wanted it, or to live independently while I wrote my next book. Emma tried to contact me when news of the book deal broke. She sent an email through her therapist. Apparently, she was finally getting help, asking if we could talk. She wanted to apologize properly. She wanted to understand what she'd done wrong. She wanted a chance at reconciliation. I thought about it for days. Part of me, the part that remembered dying alone, that carried the weight of 2 lifetimes of suffering, wanted to refuse, wanted to make her feel the pain of being shut out the way she'd shut me out of my own life for 17 years. But another part of me, the part that had grown and healed over the past 4 years, recognized that holding on to hatred was its own kind of prison. Not for Emma, for me. So I agreed to one meeting, supervised by both our therapists, in a neutral location. Emma had changed. She looked smaller somehow, less polished. The golden confidence had been replaced with something that looked like genuine humility. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Maya," she whispered, "thank you for coming." We sat down in uncomfortable chairs while our therapists observed from nearby. "I'm not going to say I forgive you," I started immediately on, "because I don't know if I can. What you did, what you and Mom and Dad did, almost destroyed me completely." She nodded, crying openly now. "I know. My therapist helped me see it. Everything. All the times I took from you. All the ways I let them make you invisible so I could be visible. I told myself you didn't mind, that you understood, that it wasn't that bad." She wiped her eyes. "But it was that bad. It was abuse. And I was part of it." "Yes," I said simply. "You were—" "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Emma said, echoing my earlier words. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I understand what I did. And I'm sorry. Not because I got caught or because there were consequences, but because you're my sister and I spent 17 years treating you like you were nothing, when you were always more than I ever was." I felt something crack in my chest. Not breaking, but perhaps beginning to heal. "You know what the worst part was?" I asked quietly. "It wasn't the stealing. It was the way you all made me believe I didn't matter, that I was only valuable when I was useful to you, that being myself was somehow wrong." "I know," Emma whispered, "and I'm so, so sorry." We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't a magical healing moment. I didn't walk away feeling like we were sisters again, like the past was erased. But I walked away feeling like maybe, someday, years from now, we might be able to build something new from the ruins of what we'd been. Or maybe not. And that was okay too. I didn't need Emma's redemption to be complete. I just needed to know I'd given her the chance and left the door open to the possibility of change, even if she never walked through it. My grandfather worried that I was being too soft, that Emma would hurt me again. But I explained what my therapist had helped me understand. Forgiveness isn't about letting people back into your life. It's about releasing the hold they have on your heart. Emma could be sorry, could change, could become better. And I could acknowledge that while still maintaining my boundaries. I didn't need to hate her anymore. I'd won, completely and thoroughly won. She'd lost Columbia, lost her reputation, lost her effortless path through life. Meanwhile, I'd gained everything: family who loved me, academic success, a publishing deal, genuine friends, and most importantly, a sense of self-worth that no one could steal. My revenge was complete not because I'd destroyed her, but because I'd built myself into someone who no longer needed revenge to feel whole. Graduation came with less fanfare than high school, but more genuine joy. My grandfather threw me an enormous party, inviting colleagues, friends, professors, and even my literary agent and publisher. The conversation buzzed with talk of my upcoming book release, my plans for graduate school, my future. Mrs. Richardson attended, now retired, but still following my career with pride. "You've become everything I knew you could be," she told me warmly. "That essay you wrote senior year of high school, the one about being invisible, it broke my heart, but look at you now, incandescent." I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for seeing me when my own family couldn't." "That's what teachers are for," she said simply. "I just wish I'd seen it sooner, stopped it sooner." "You stopped it when it mattered most," I assured her. "You gave me the validation I needed to start fighting back." The party stretched late into the night. I stood on the balcony of my grandfather's penthouse, looking out over the city, feeling the weight and lightness of everything I'd accomplished. My grandfather joined me, handing me a glass of champagne. "To your future," he said, raising his glass. "To family who actually deserves the name," I countered, clinking mine against his. We drank in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, when your mother first left me, I was angry. Then I was sad. Then I spent 20 years trying not to think about her at all." He looked at me with infinite tenderness. "But if she hadn't left, if she hadn't married that man and had you, I wouldn't have you in my life now. So perhaps everything happens for a reason." "I don't know about that," I said thoughtfully. "But I know we make the best of what we're given. You taught me that." "You taught yourself that," he corrected. "I just gave you the resources to do it." My phone buzzed, a message from my publisher. The advance copies of my book had arrived. She was sending one over tomorrow. My book, my words, my story, under my name alone, with no one to steal it from me. In my first life, I died nameless and forgotten. My contributions attributed to others, my suffering invisible. But in this life, I'd written myself into permanence. My story would be published, read, discussed. Perhaps it would help other scapegoats recognize their abuse and find the courage to escape. That was worth more than any revenge. That was legacy. The book launched 6 months later to critical acclaim. Reviews praised its raw honesty, its unflinching look at family dysfunction, and its ultimately hopeful message about survival and self-discovery. It became a bestseller, not through my parents' connections, they had none left, but through genuine word of mouth and literary merit. I did interviews, book tours, speaking engagements. I talked about growing up as a scapegoat, about the particular cruelty of having your achievements stolen by the people who should celebrate them, about the long road to recovery and self-worth. And everywhere I went, people came up to me with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories. The daughter whose mother pitted her against her sister. The son whose accomplishments were always overshadowed by his golden child brother. The child who'd grown up believing they were inherently less valuable than their siblings. I listened to all of them. I validated their pain, and I shared the same message. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it. You deserved better, and it's never too late to choose yourself. Emma bought the book. I know because she wrote me a letter, a real, handwritten letter, after reading it. "I saw myself in every villain," she wrote, "and I hated it, but I needed to see it. I needed to understand what I was to you. My therapist says I'll be working through the guilt for the rest of my life. She says that's appropriate, that I should feel guilty, that I should carry the weight of what I did. But she also says I can choose to be better going forward, even if better never makes up for the past. I'm trying, Maya. I'm trying to be someone who earns rather than steals, to lift others up instead of standing on their backs. I know you don't need to know this. I know you've moved beyond needing anything from me, but I needed to tell you anyway. You were always the better person, and your success isn't in spite of what we did to you. It's a testament to your strength despite it. I kept the letter, not as evidence or weapon, but as acknowledgement. Emma couldn't undo the past, but she was at least trying to understand it. That was more than our parents had ever done. My mother never acknowledged the book publicly, but I heard through distant relatives that she'd had a breakdown after reading it, that she'd recognized herself and had to be briefly hospitalized for depression. Part of me felt guilty about that. But my therapist reminded me that my mother's emotional crisis was a result of finally facing the consequences of her own actions, not anything I'd done to her. My father tried to sue again, claiming the book violated his privacy and defamed his character. The lawsuit was thrown out immediately. I'd changed enough details to avoid libel, and truth remained an absolute defense. His lawyer quietly suggested he stop trying because each lawsuit just brought more attention to his past behavior. 3 years after graduation, I was invited to speak at Columbia's graduation ceremony. Standing at that podium, looking out at the sea of graduates, I thought about both versions of myself, the girl who'd died alone and the woman who'd fought her way to freedom. Success, I told them, is not about being the most talented or the most privileged. It's about surviving the people who try to stop you and building something beautiful from the wreckage they leave behind. It's about refusing to let others define your worth. It's about finding the courage to say, I matter, when everyone around you insists you don't. I paused, my voice strong and clear. Some of you come from families who celebrated your every achievement. Some of you had to fight for every bit of recognition you received. Some of you are here despite your families rather than because of them. Whatever your path was, you earned this moment. You earned your degree. You earned your future. And no one can take that from you unless you let them. The applause was thunderous, and in that moment, I realized I'd achieved something beyond revenge, beyond vindication, beyond justice. I'd achieved peace. My grandfather, now 80 and slightly frailer but still sharp as ever, stood in the front row, tears streaming down his face. Next to him sat Mrs. Richardson, my agent, my publisher, and several of the friends I'd made over the years, people who valued me for who I was, not who they could use me to be. Emma wasn't there, but she'd sent flowers to my hotel room that morning with a note. Proud of you. Always was, even when I was too broken to show it. I didn't know if Emma and I would ever truly reconcile. I didn't know if my parents would ever genuinely understand what they'd done. And honestly, I was okay with not knowing. Because my happiness no longer depended on their acknowledgement. My worth wasn't determined by their approval. My success wasn't diminished by their bitterness. I had survived. I had thrived. I had turned years of abuse into art that helped others recognize and escape their own dysfunction. And that was the sweetest revenge of all, living well, authentically, unapologetically. The student council president handed me a commemorative plaque thanking me for my speech. I accepted it with grace, thinking about the girl I'd been in my first life, who would have been too timid to even attend her own graduation, too broken to believe she deserved recognition. That girl was gone. She'd died at 23 in a roach-infested apartment, alone and forgotten. But she'd been reborn as someone stronger. Someone who refused to be invisible. Someone who knew her worth and wouldn't let anyone steal it from her again. And this time, I was writing my own ending. One where the scapegoat becomes the hero. Where stolen words are reclaimed. Where justice isn't just served but savored. One where the girl everyone overlooked becomes impossible to ignore. That evening, as I celebrated with my grandfather and friends, someone asked me if I ever regretted exposing my family, if I ever wished I'd taken the easier path of silence. I thought about the question seriously, considering both lifetimes of experience. Then I smiled and said, the only thing I regret is not speaking up sooner. But I'm grateful for the lesson. Your voice matters. Use it, even when, especially when, people try to silence you. My grandfather squeezed my hand. To Maya, he said, raising his glass. Who taught an old man that family isn't always blood and revenge isn't always bitter? Sometimes it's building a life so bright, it outshines everyone who tried to dim your light. To Maya, the room echoed, and I raised my glass too, toasting the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, and the future I'd earned through sheer refusal to stay silent. I'd been given an impossible second chance, a rebirth with all my memories intact, and I'd used it not just to punish my abusers, but to become fully, unapologetically myself. In my first life, Emma had stolen my essay and destroyed my future. In this life, I'd let her steal my essay, knowing it would destroy hers, and then I'd built a future so magnificent, so undeniably mine, that no one could ever take it from me again. That was the difference between revenge and justice, between surviving and thriving, between being a victim and being victorious. I chose victory. Every single day, I chose it, and I would never ever regret that choice.